My wife whispered, "You've lived long enough," as her lover cut off my oxygen tube, not knowing the night nurse was hiding behind the curtain watching everything. 35 years of marriage, and this is how Linda wanted to end our story, suffocating me in a hospital bed while she planned her new life with Dr. Rodriguez. If you've ever trusted the wrong person with your life, if you've ever had someone you love try to steal your last breath, grab a chair and listen close. This tale's got more poison than a snake bite. And if you like stories about people who think they're smarter than they really are, hit that subscribe button for Grandpa's Diaries. I've got plenty more about folks who dig their own graves while thinking they're planting flowers. I'm always here with fresh coffee and hard truths about trusting the people who hold your heart in their hands. I was supposed to be recovering from routine heart surgery. Nothing too serious for a man my age. Dr. Rodriguez had assured me it was a simple procedure. Clean out some blockages, get the blood flowing properly again, and I'd be home in a week feeling better than I had in years. Linda had been so attentive during my hospital stay, bringing me my favorite books, fluffing my pillows, making sure I was comfortable. The perfect devoted wife playing her role to perfection. But lying there in that hospital bed at 2 a.m., unable to move much and dependent on machines to keep me stable, I heard Linda's voice in the hallway talking to someone in hushed, intimate tones. "How much longer do we have to wait?" she was asking. "I'm tired of pretending to care about his recovery. When can we be together openly?" The voice that answered was Dr. Rodriguez, my trusted physician, speaking to my wife like a lover instead of a medical professional. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep when they entered my room, but I could feel their presence beside my bed, could hear them checking my monitors and whispering about my condition. "His heart's still strong," Rodriguez said quietly, "but at his age, complications can happen so easily. A little too much medication, a brief oxygen interruption. These things are unfortunately common in cardiac recovery patients." Linda's response made my blood run cold, despite the warm hospital air. "I can't keep living this lie, Stephen. Frank's insurance policy will set us free, and with his construction business, we could start fresh somewhere warm. Maybe that clinic in Costa Rica you've always talked about." They were planning my murder right there beside my bed, discussing my death like a business transaction while machines beeped steadily, monitoring the life they were planning to end. That's when I felt hands on my oxygen tube, Rodriguez's skilled surgeon fingers that had saved countless lives now working to end mine. Linda leaned close to my ear, her voice soft and deadly, as she whispered those words that would haunt me forever. "You've lived long enough, Frank. It's time to let go." But neither of them saw Nurse Angela step quietly behind the privacy curtain, her eyes wide with horror as she witnessed my wife and doctor attempting to commit the perfect murder in plain sight. Linda wasn't always a killer. There was a time when she was the sweetest thing in Millfield, working as a secretary at Patterson & Associates law firm, while I was building Coleman Construction from nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. She had this laugh that could light up a room and a way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the world when she talked to them. I fell for her the first day she brought coffee to our construction site, wearing a yellow sundress and apologizing for interrupting our work. Those early years were tough but beautiful. We lived in a tiny apartment above Murphy's hardware store, saving every penny to buy our first house. A little two-bedroom fixer-upper on Elm Street that needed everything from new plumbing to a complete roof replacement. Linda would work all day at the law office, then come home and help me renovate our future, holding flashlights while I rewired outlets and painting walls until midnight. "We're building our dreams with our own hands," she'd say, covered in paint but smiling like a queen. She supported my business through every struggle and setback. When my first big contract fell through and we couldn't make the house payment, Linda took a second job waitressing at Denny's without complaint. When I threw out my back and couldn't work for 6 weeks, she held down 3 jobs and still came home cheerful, massaging my shoulders and telling me we'd get through anything together. "That's what partnerships are for," she'd whisper. 2 people sharing one dream. Our wedding was small but perfect, held in Linda's family church with a reception in the community center that her mother decorated with flowers from her own garden. Linda wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit her perfectly, and I rented the nicest tux in town. When we danced to "The Way You Look Tonight," I thought I was the luckiest man alive. She looked at me like I was her hero, and I promised myself I'd spend my life making sure she never regretted choosing a simple construction worker over the lawyers and doctors who flirted with her at the office. Linda wanted children desperately, and we tried for years before accepting that it wouldn't happen for us. I watched her heart break a little more each month when hope turned to disappointment, but she channeled that maternal love into making our house a home. She'd cook elaborate dinners for just the two of us, plant gardens that neighbors would stop to admire, and turn every holiday into a celebration that felt magical even without children to share it with. The business grew steadily, and Linda became my unofficial partner in everything. She kept the books, scheduled appointments, and charmed difficult clients into signing contracts. When we finally built our dream house on the hill overlooking the lake, she designed every room with the same care she'd put into our first tiny apartment. "Look what we accomplished together," she'd say, standing on our deck watching the sunset. Two kids from nothing who built something beautiful. But success changed Linda in ways I was too busy to notice at first. She started talking about travel, about experiences she felt she'd missed by marrying young and staying in our small town. She'd mention couples we knew who'd divorced and found new happiness, speaking about them with an envy that should have been a warning sign. "Don't you ever wonder what else is out there?" she'd ask. But I was content with what we'd built together. I thought our love was strong enough to weather any midlife restlessness, but I'd underestimated how deep that restlessness had grown roots in her heart. The changes in Linda started about 6 months before my heart surgery, subtle shifts that I attributed to normal stress and aging. She began paying more attention to her appearance, joining a gym and buying expensive workout clothes that seemed designed more for fashion than fitness. "I need to take better care of myself," she'd explain when I commented on her new routines. "We're not getting any younger, and I want to stay healthy for both of us." Her work schedule became increasingly erratic, with frequent late meetings and weekend conferences that hadn't been part of her routine for 20 years at the law firm. "Patterson's expanding into medical malpractice," she'd tell me, packing overnight bags for seminars in nearby cities. "I need to learn the new specialty areas if I want to keep my position." The enthusiasm in her voice when she talked about these trips was something I hadn't heard in years, and I was happy she'd found renewed purpose in her career. Linda started mentioning Dr. Rodriguez's name more often, usually in the context of legal consultations Patterson and Associates was handling for the hospital. "He's so knowledgeable about cardiac procedures," she'd say over dinner. "Really takes time to explain complex medical issues in terms we can understand for the legal briefs." She'd describe him as professional, thorough, and surprisingly down-to-earth for someone with his reputation. I was grateful she was working with competent people. The phone calls began around the same time, hushed conversations Linda would take in the garden or upstairs in our bedroom. When I asked about them, she'd say they were work-related, confidential legal matters that required privacy. "Medical malpractice cases are very sensitive," she'd explain. "We have to be extremely careful about discussing details even at home." The calls seemed to energize her in a way that regular work never had. Our intimate life disappeared gradually, so subtly that I didn't realize how complete the change had become until months had passed. Linda always had a reason: headaches, exhaustion from her new responsibilities, or concern about my heart condition that made her afraid of putting strain on my cardiovascular system. "The doctor says we should be careful until after your surgery," she'd say, turning away from me in bed. I couldn't forgive myself if something happened because we were careless. When I finally met Dr. Rodriguez during my pre-surgery consultations, I was struck by how much Linda had undersold his charm and attractiveness. He was younger than I'd expected, confident without being arrogant, and he had a way of making both Linda and me feel like we were in the most capable hands possible. "Your wife's been instrumental in helping us understand the legal implications of cardiac care," he told me with a smile that seemed warm and professional. "She's quite remarkable." But I began noticing the way they looked at each other during my medical appointments. Glances that lasted just a moment too long, smiles that seemed to carry private meaning. Linda would touch Dr. Rodriguez's arm when asking questions about my treatment, and he'd lean closer to her than necessary when explaining procedures. They had the comfortable familiarity of people who'd spent considerable time together, more than legal consultations would require. Still, I trusted them both completely, never imagining that my heart surgeon and devoted wife were planning to stop that heart permanently once I was vulnerable and dependent on their care. The night they tried to kill me, everything had been planned with medical precision. Dr. Rodriguez had scheduled my surgery for a Thursday, knowing that weekend staffing would be lighter and night shifts less supervised. Linda had made sure to establish herself as the devoted wife who rarely left my bedside, creating the perfect cover for being present during visiting hours when most family members would be home sleeping. My recovery had been going better than expected, which seemed to frustrate them both. I'd caught whispered conversations about complications that hadn't materialized, setbacks that should have occurred but didn't. His vitals are too strong, Rodriguez had muttered to Linda during one evening visit. At this rate, he'll be discharged by Tuesday. We need to move faster than planned. The urgency in his voice carried a weight I was only beginning to understand. They'd been giving me additional medications that weren't on my chart, small doses of sedatives that Rodriguez claimed would help with sleep and anxiety. Recovery is stressful for patients your age, he'd explain, while Linda nodded supportively. These will help you rest more deeply, which promotes healing. But the drugs made me groggy and disoriented, unable to think clearly or remember conversations from one day to the next. Linda had been working late at the office more frequently, but I realized now she'd actually been spending those evenings with Rodriguez, planning every detail of my murder. They'd researched my insurance policies, consulted with lawyers about inheritance procedures, and even looked into properties in Costa Rica where they planned to start their new life together. My death was just a business obstacle to overcome on their path to happiness. The attempt came during the shift change at 2 a.m., when the hallways were quietest and the nursing staff was focused on handoff reports. Rodriguez entered my room first, checking the monitors and adjusting settings in ways that seemed routine but were actually preparation for what was coming. Linda arrived 15 minutes later, playing her role as the concerned wife who couldn't sleep and wanted to check on her husband's condition. "He's been asking for more pain medication," Linda told Rodriguez in what she thought was a whisper. "Maybe something stronger to help him rest peacefully." The word peacefully carried a finality that made my skin crawl. Rodriguez nodded and prepared a syringe with something that definitely wasn't standard post-operative care. They were going to make it look like my heart had simply given out during recovery. A tragic but not uncommon occurrence for men my age. But when Rodriguez moved toward my IV line with that syringe, I saw Nurse Angela slip quietly into the room for her routine vitals check. She must have sensed something wrong immediately because instead of announcing her presence, she stepped behind the privacy curtain and watched as Rodriguez disconnected my oxygen supply while Linda whispered those terrible words in my ear. Angela's training kicked in, and instead of screaming or trying to intervene immediately, she remained hidden and used her phone to record everything, capturing evidence that would later destroy them both. Sometimes the best heroes are the ones who stay calm enough to think clearly when evil reveals itself in the darkness. Angela Thompson had been a cardiac nurse for 8 years, long enough to recognize when something wasn't right about a patient's care. She'd entered my room for routine vitals monitoring and immediately noticed that my oxygen saturation levels were dropping while my heart rate spiked. Signs that should have triggered immediate medical intervention, not whispered conversations between my wife and doctor. Her nursing instincts told her to act, but her survival instincts told her to observe and gather evidence first. Hidden behind the privacy curtain, Angela watched Rodriguez systematically disconnect my oxygen supply while Linda coached him through the process. "Make sure it looks natural," Linda whispered. "No obvious signs of interference." Rodriguez nodded, his surgeon's hands steady as he manipulated equipment he knew better than anyone else in the hospital. They weren't panicking or making mistakes. This was clearly a rehearsed performance. Angela's phone was already recording when Linda leaned close to my ear and delivered those chilling words about living long enough. The audio quality was perfect, capturing every syllable of my wife's confession and Rodriguez's clinical directions about making my death appear natural. "His heart's already weak from surgery," Rodriguez murmured. "Oxygen deprivation will trigger cardiac arrest, and given his age and recent procedure, no one will question the cause of death." The most horrifying part for Angela wasn't just witnessing attempted murder, it was realizing how many other unexpected complications might have been orchestrated by Rodriguez over the years. Cardiac patients died regularly during recovery, and he was the attending physician who certified causes of death and comforted grieving families. How many wives like Linda had paid him to help them become widows? How many inheritances had funded his lifestyle, while families mourned loved ones who'd been murdered? Angela continued recording as they discussed their post-murder plans with casual brutality. Linda mentioned selling the construction business and my life insurance policy, while Rodriguez talked about resigning from the hospital once they were safely established in Costa Rica. 2 more months and we'll be free, Linda said, stroking my forehead with mock tenderness. No more pretending to love him, no more waiting for him to die naturally. When my oxygen levels became critically low, Angela faced an impossible choice. Intervene immediately to save my life or continue gathering evidence that might be needed to convict them later. She chose a middle path, timing her routine entry into the room just as Rodriguez was preparing to administer the fatal injection. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said loudly, pretending surprise at finding visitors during quiet hours. "I need to check Mr. Coleman's vitals. Would you mind stepping out for just a moment?" Her sudden appearance clearly rattled them both. Rodriguez quickly reconnected my oxygen while Linda fumbled for explanations about being unable to sleep and wanting to check on me. "Of course," Rodriguez said smoothly, his professional demeanor sliding back into place like a mask. We were just discussing his excellent progress. He should be ready for discharge soon. But Angela had already seen behind that mask, and her phone contained evidence that would ensure neither of them would ever hurt another patient again. Angela waited until Rodriguez and Linda left my room before checking my condition and ensuring my oxygen levels were stable. She'd been a nurse long enough to know that reporting attempted murder by a respected physician would require ironclad evidence, especially when the accusations came from a night shift nurse against a doctor who brought millions in revenue to the hospital. Her phone recording was good, but she needed more than voices in the dark to convince authorities. The next morning, Angela approached the charge nurse with carefully worded concerns about irregularities in my care during the night shift. She didn't mention attempted murder directly, but suggested that my chart showed medication discrepancies and oxygen monitoring gaps that warranted investigation. "Dr. Rodriguez's notes don't match the actual equipment readings I observed," she explained, providing a paper trail that would support her eventual testimony. Linda arrived for visiting hours acting like the same devoted wife she'd always appeared to be, bringing flowers and magazines and chattering about my recovery progress. But Angela was watching now, noting how Linda's eyes constantly tracked the monitors and medical equipment, how she asked detailed questions about my medication schedule and nursing routines. This wasn't a concerned wife. This was a predator studying her prey and planning another attack. Dr. Rodriguez made his rounds with professional calm, but Angela could see the tension in his movements when he thought no one was watching. He avoided making direct eye contact with her and kept his interactions with me brief and clinical. During his examination, Angela noticed him palming a syringe that wasn't on my medication orders, confirming that last night's attempt was just the beginning of their murder plan. That afternoon, Angela made copies of my medical records, focusing on the discrepancies between ordered medications and what was actually being administered. She also documented the unusual pattern of night visits from Linda and Rodriguez, noting times and durations that exceeded normal visiting protocols. Her nursing supervisor initially dismissed these concerns as overzealousness from a newer staff member, but Angela persisted until she agreed to review the documentation. The breakthrough came when Angela shared her concerns with Detective Maria Gonzalez, whose mother had been a cardiac patient at the same hospital 2 years earlier. Detective Gonzalez had always suspected something wasn't right about her mother's sudden decline and death, but medical professionals had assured her that complications were normal for elderly patients. Angela's evidence gave her the probable cause needed to open a formal investigation into Rodriguez's patient mortality rates. Within 48 hours, detectives were reviewing death certificates and insurance claims for Rodriguez's cardiac patients over the past 3 years. The pattern was unmistakable. An unusually high number of unexpected deaths among wealthy older patients whose spouses had been working closely with the hospital's legal department. Linda's name appeared in consultation records for at least 6 other cases, all involving substantial life insurance policies and grieving widows, who'd inherited significant assets after their husbands' unfortunate complications during routine procedures. By Friday morning, police had enough evidence to arrest both Linda and Rodriguez before they could attempt another murder or flee the country. The charges included conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and multiple counts of homicide for the patients who hadn't been as lucky as me. Angela's phone recording would be the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, but it was her nursing expertise and dedication to patient safety that had uncovered a murder scheme that might have continued for years if she hadn't been brave enough to speak up. 8 months later, I'm sitting in my living room watching Linda and Dr. Rodriguez get sentenced on the evening news. She got life without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and multiple counts of homicide, while Rodriguez received the death penalty for what the judge called a profound violation of the sacred trust between physician and patient. Linda's lawyer had tried to argue she was manipulated by Rodriguez, but the evidence showed she'd been an equal partner in planning not just my murder, but at least 5 others over the past 3 years. The trial revealed the full scope of their operation, a systematic targeting of wealthy cardiac patients whose wives could be convinced to part with substantial fees for Rodriguez's special services. Linda had used her position at the law firm to identify potential victims, researching their assets and insurance policies before Rodriguez performed their surgeries. They'd split millions in insurance payouts and inheritance settlements, with victims' families never suspecting their loved ones had been murdered by the people they trusted most. Angela Thompson was hailed as a hero throughout the trial, but she remained humble about her role in stopping them. "I was just doing my job," she told reporters. "Nurses are supposed to protect patients, and when I saw someone trying to harm Mr. Coleman, I had to act." The hospital awarded her a commendation for excellence in patient care, and she's now the supervisor of the cardiac unit, implementing new protocols to prevent medical staff from taking advantage of vulnerable patients. Detective Gonzalez personally thanked me for surviving long enough to help bring justice for her mother and the other victims. "Your case gave us the evidence we needed to reopen all those suspicious deaths," she explained during a visit to my house. "Without Angela's recording and your testimony, Linda and Rodriguez might have killed dozens more people." The detective's mother turned out to be one of their earlier victims, murdered for a modest inheritance that funded their growing ambitions. The hardest part hasn't been the betrayal or the near-death experience. It's been learning to trust again after 35 years of marriage to someone who was planning my murder. My new cardiologist, Dr. Patricia Williams, has to explain every medication and procedure in detail because I can't help but question motives now. She's patient with my paranoia, understanding that medical settings will probably always trigger anxiety for someone who nearly died at the hands of a trusted physician. I've sold Coleman Construction and donated most of the proceeds to a fund that helps families of medical murder victims get proper investigations when they suspect wrongdoing. The house on the hill holds too many memories of Linda, so I've moved to a smaller place near the lake where I can watch boats and remember simpler times. Sometimes I wonder if there were signs I missed, moments when I should have seen Linda's true nature. But my therapist reminds me that some evil hides behind masks so perfect that even love can't see through them. The strangest part is feeling grateful for almost dying. If Angela hadn't been there that night, if she hadn't been brave enough to stay hidden and gather evidence, Linda and Rodriguez would have succeeded. They'd be living in Costa Rica now, spending my money and planning their next victim, while I'd be buried in Millfield Cemetery with a headstone that read "Beloved Husband." Instead, I'm alive to tell this story and warn others that sometimes the people who promise to love you until death really mean they'll love you to death. Trust is precious, but life is more precious, and sometimes you need someone like Angela watching from the shadows to remind you which one matters most.